Meeting, would you please rise for the pledge to the flag? The flag is over here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for coming out on such a cold evening. This is the Woodbury Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. If you're at the wrong meeting, you can leave or stay. All right, I'd like to introduce the board members. To your far right, we have Mr. Joe DiVenuto, Mr. Gary Kestenbaum, Mr. Kevin Abrams, Mr. Andrew Giacomazza. Did I say that right? All right. I'm Karen Ungura, the chairperson. And to my right, your far left, is our attorney, Michael Donnelly. All righty. Our next board meeting will be in January 10th. It's almost always the second Wednesday of the month. We don't need an executive session today. Has everyone read the minutes from November 8th?
Yes.
Anybody have any comments on it? No? Do I have a
I'd like
motion?
Motion to accept the minutes?
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. We have no new business. We have no action on decisions, and moving right along, we have a public hearing. This is a continuation from November. This is the continuation for an area variance to permit the construction of a new single-family dwelling on a lot having no frontage on a public street pursuant to Section 310-12A2 of Village Code and 280A of Town Law. Building lots must have a minimum frontage of 100 feet. Said vacant property is located in the R2A zoning district on Campbell Avenue, a private road, in Highland Mills, and is known on the Village of Woodbury tax maps as Section 216, Block 7, Lots 2, 3, 13, and 14. Just to have a recap of what this is an application for, this is 4 quarter-acre lots that would like to be combined, approximately quarter-acre lots, to be combined to equal 1 acre on a private road. The variance is requested because new construction must be on a public road, must have frontage on a public road. The question last month was as to whether this application needed to come before the planning board. It does not, according to Mr. Gary Thomasberger. These lots were subdivided in 1958. Although there have been several different owners of the lots, all 4 lots have been in single ownership since being subdivided. Pursuant to a Village of Woodbury Code Section 310-43.1 C2, a minimum of 20,000 square feet of lot area would be required, in which the combined lot area of all lots are approximately 43,264 square feet. This conforms to the minimum lot area required by code. Furthermore, all setbacks of the R2A zoning district would conform to the requirements, as well as the 100-foot minimum frontage and 20% maximum coverage. The removal of the lot lines would not require planning board approval. This would be neither a subdivision of land nor a lot line change. Lot lines can be removed by simply writing a form letter to the assessor's office. In any case, non-conforming lots that are of the same ownership are deemed to be merged automatically under doctrine of merger requirements. So no further variances are required. The only variance that is being sought is the only one that is necessary. In addition to the letter from Mr. Thomasberger, we have a letter from Mr. John Calamari on 32 Campbell Avenue, which refers to the road maintenance agreement. We did request a copy of that at the last meeting. Neither the applicant nor any resident has supplied that. We did receive also a letter from the county that this is a matter for local jurisdiction. We received police and fire letters that say that there's no problem with access to the road. I'm going to ask if the applicant is present. I guess you are. I would also request that if anybody has anything to say, please wait for your turn to come to the podium, because if you call out from the audience, nobody can really hear. You need to address the board, not the members of the public. So if the applicant is ready, if you could state your name and how you represent the applicant and give us your presentation. Oh, I can't see you there. Sorry about that.
Good evening. My name is Jay Myro. I'm an attorney with Bluestein, Shapiro, Rich and Barone, Goshen, New York. I'm the attorney for the applicant. Just some bookkeeping. I submitted a letter today by fax. I stated I have a hard copy that I would like to file and make part of the record. And I referenced in the letter 4 prior decisions that had been made by the town of Woodbury Zoning Board of Appeals regarding Campbell Avenue. So if I may,
You can give that to us to enter into the record, but just so you know, you're supposed to have things ready 2 weeks before the meeting.
all right, well, this is just simply past decisions which are of record in the village offices already.
All right, we'll
And-
enter it into the record.
Pardon?
Well, we will take
Okay.
it to enter into the
Would you
record,
like-
but
Can I hand these?
just give it to us and we'll pass it down. Thank you.
I also have extra copies if anyone would like them.
I had that somewhere. I thought.
No, we all got copies today.
Okay. Sir, you guys have?
Guys,
Thank you. Jay. Yeah, that goes with it. Those are the decisions. Hmm? That's going down to be put into evidence. They have copies.
That goes to Karen.
All right, so basically, this is an application pursuant to your village code, pursuant to village law and town law requiring a lot that's proposed to be built with a single-family residence that does not front on a public road to be approved by this board by either variance or by other means as set forth in your code. As I set forth in my letter and in the attachments, there is a history with Campbell Avenue. It goes back to 1988, where the first application was made by a Mr. Hennessy. And apparently in 1988, Campbell Avenue was very interestingly referred to in the decision of the board as being nothing more than a cow path. And because it wasn't suitable for emergency vehicles, that application was denied under Town Law 280A, which requires a road on the applicable road to be suitable for emergency vehicles. Just for the record, the Campbell Avenue is a street on a filed map. The map was filed prior to the existence of the planning board, but that does put it into a certain category under your village code, which does allow for homes to be built along a road that is a paper street, a street that is shown on a map. The Hennessy property, 3 years later, had been purchased by Mrs. Sweeney. She came in, made application to build on Mr. Hennessy's prior lots, what she owned at that time. And she came in with a proposal to build the private road and prove it to certain specifications. Those specifications were provided by the village engineer, Dennis Lindsay, who still sits in that seat. And he proposed certain dimensions and construction specifications, namely that the road be built to 18 feet in width, that it have a 2-inch base of blacktop, and that it have a 2-inch asphalt top coat. Those specifications were approved by the board, and a 288 variance was granted, allowing construction so long as the road was built. Apparently, it was built, the permit was issued, the CO was issued. In the year 2000, an application was made by Abraham Malik, and at his first application, he had a relatively undersized lot, and he proposed to subdivide it into 2, what the board described as extremely undersized lots. The board denied his variance and very pointedly did state that it wasn't based on the standards set by, in the Sweeney decision. It wasn't based on the adequacy of the road. It was simply based on the size of the lots. They were way too small. Mr. Malik came back a year later, agreed not to subdivide his property. The board granted the 280A variance, and in doing so, noted the specifications that had been approved in Sweeney, required Mr. Malik to extend Campbell Avenue to those specifications and to build the driveway off of Campbell up towards Edison, which is a paper street never improved, to those same specifications. So that is basically the history. The present lot is basically the first lot that you would come to when you turn off of Bakertown Road. So we are the one closest to Bakertown. The road has been improved well past where we are. Based on based on your prior history, we believe that there is adequate proof. You have emergency vehicle letters. The road is sufficient to support emergency vehicles. And based on that, we believe we're entitled to the relief requested. What I'd like to say before you open this up to the public and for further consideration, what this application is not about is the size of the structure that may be built on there, the location of the structure, as it may relate to setbacks and other requirements on the lot. Those are strictly within the jurisdiction of Mr. Thomas Berger as the building inspector. If this variance is granted, a plot plan will be required to be submitted showing that we meet all setbacks, no matter what the size of the building. The size of the building will be governed by whatever perks can be gotten on the property. They may limit the size. The setbacks will limit the size. Certain environmental constraints may limit the size, but those are not what is being considered in the course of this application. This is simply based on our ability to build with access off of a private road. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Board members have any questions?
Just so I can clarify this.
Sure.
So 2 variances were granted and 2 variances were denied on this, on Campbell Avenue? Is
Correct.
that correct? So isn't it almost like a toss-up?
No, same property. Exact
Okay.
same property. They
But
were
2 of
both,
them
they
were
were both
denied and
approved.
2 of them were and let me ask you this, what were the size of the lots that we were talking about at this time?
They were
4?
conforming.
Okay.
I don't know the exact size, but the point is that these applicants came in the first one came in at a time where the road was a path. It clearly wasn't built. It was approved when they came in with specs provided by the village engineer.
Okay.
And it was approved saying that these will be sufficient for emergency vehicles. Malik came in, the first time he came in, he wanted to build probably 1/8 of an acre. They said, forget it. Either you withdraw it or we're not going to give it to you. He saw the light. He came back in with saying, I'm not going to subdivide my property. Just let me build my one house. And they said, fine. Just build the road to the specs that were approved in Sweeney. So it's not a push. Those lots,
That was the word I was looking for.
it wasn't a push. It was, absolutely wasn't a push. Matter of fact, it set the precedent. And the board did follow the Sweeney precedent in applying it to Malik.
Any other questions from the board?
Yes, I have one. Okay, a resident, Ann Calamari, presented to us a letter, the gist of which is questioning road agreements, easements, and/or proof that the owner of this property has the right to access or to invite his or her contractors onto the site for whatever business would be necessary to build a house. To my knowledge, we haven't received, this board has not received, and is within its rights to request documents, legal documents that satisfy the board that the owner has either easements or legal right to use that road and to invite contractors on and such.
All right. my understanding, and I got this information off the tax lot, off the tax map, is that Campbell Avenue is a street on a filed map. I think it was a map filed in 1914, but I think it was a map that had all these cottage lots on it, and that makes it a paper street. Anybody who fronts on that street is entitled to access as of right. It's as of right. There's nothing further needed. You do not need an easement. It's a paper street. That street may be improved to the satisfaction of the town engineer and subject to getting your variance. But I don't other than, I saw on the map reference on the site plan. We'll pull the deed. If I don't have it, I'm sorry, I'm late, I got a little late in the game here. We don't have it, but I am 100% certain that Campbell Avenue is a street on a filed map.
Gary,
Mr. Donnelly.
that's a correct statement of the law. Having a piece of property on a street shown on a filed map entitles you to access to that property.
But who owns the road?
That's a different question. I don't know whether it was a developer or whether these properties own to the center line. I
Who
haven't
owns
seen
the
it
road?
surveyed.
Does anybody own it?
Someone has to. Either the property owners own to the center line and there's a defined right-of-way, or it was held in the name of some developer and probably still sits that way. John, does the map show?
The map shows it as its own parcel,
Yeah.
and our lots and the lots around us do not go to the center. It forms almost a 50-foot line.
But it is shown as a paper street.
That's correct.
What's happened, what you typically find, especially, we find this a lot in Monroe, where all these bungalow cottages were created in the early 1900s. The assessor will create a tax lot for the road system. The road system stays in the name of the corporation in 1914. They go out of business 20 years later, and it just
There it
sits. The homeowners all get together. Either they get together and they improve the road and maintain it, or they don't. But it doesn't matter who owns it. Anybody, let's say somebody took that lot in a tax sale. They buy it subject to the rights of everybody who fronts on that road to use that road.
But he could also use Edison.
Excuse me?
He could also use Edison.
Edison's not built. Doesn't have to use Edison. He can use any one that fronts his lot. One isn't better than the other, especially if one is built. You can't force somebody to build something when they have adequate access off a road that's built.
Well, I'm waiting to see the road maintenance agreement.
Well, as to any road maintenance agreement, my client will obviously consider joining in it. But in the course of, but they're also, even if they don't join in it, they're obligated to clear the snow and maintain that road at least to their property line. And that's an obligation under your code.
Who is your client?
My client is the owner right now, Kumar.
Okay. So, I gotta ask, does he have an agreement in place to sell the property?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know
I'm
who that
working with
entity
both.
is?
The entity,
Yeah. Owner?
I have the name of somebody, I don't know the name of the entity or the owner that's doing it. I wasn't involved in the contract. I have never seen the contract. I have no idea who the contract party is in that entity.
Did they do the design work on this house? Or was this something Kumar had set up? I mean,
The
I'm
design
assuming
of the
that
house,
Bobby
I do not
Kumar is
believe,
not.
I don't believe Mr. Kumar, if you have architectural drawings, I do not believe Mr. Kumar prepared those. Probably is the buyer. I don't know why he would go through the expense of
So
developing
he
architecturals.
already has a deal in place.
Yes. To my knowledge, yes. I have never seen the contract. I'm not the attorney involved in that at all.
So you are contracted by Bobby Kumar, not Bobby.
Well, Mr. Kumar is the applicant, so I'm here on that effect. I haven't met Mr. Kumar.
Okay. Have you spoken to him on the phone at all?
No. I'm here for the application.
Okay.
I mean, I can't represent anybody other than who the applicant is.
I'm good, let's,
Any other question?
I
Oh,
have
go
one
ahead.
more question. This is for John. I think at the November, based on my minutes, I know you were involved with the Bakertown Estates. And I think with that application, you had a restricted covenant as per the water supply. Is that applicable here with this applicant?
No, that is not on this property.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I have one question concerning the well as well, since it was a concern that was voiced at the last public hearing about this application. This house had over 4,000 square feet upstairs and downstairs. That's a pretty good-sized house. With impact in mind, what will be the projected daily water usage for this house?
It's designed as a four-bedroom house, so it's going to be your standard 110 gallons per day per bedroom. So you're going to be around 440 gallons per day, 500. Your typical single-family, that's how it would be designed.
And or I should say, when the well is drilled, how is it that you check to see how this new well impacts the existing wells on Campbell Avenue?
What occurs is there's an application to the building inspector. We then go out and drill the well. We then go and approach the neighbors and ask them if they'd be willing to have well monitoring. They have to give us permission. They can either ask for it or deny it. And then based on whoever says yes or no, we put the monitors in, and then there's a pump test that's run. And then that's how the calculations are projected as to what the capacity of the well is.
And that's done every time?
Hmm?
And that's the building department and the water department that would be
That's
monitored?
through your building department.
Through the building department.
That's correct. Through the building department application for this house, you would go through, they'll look at the septic, they'll look at the well, they're gonna look at the site plan, the grading, et cetera, through the building department.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the board? Does the applicant have anything they need to present? Other than, besides.
Other than what we
you
presented
did-
the last time,
right.
yeah, no.
Anything new?
Nothing new,
Okay.
nothing new, everything stayed the same.
Mr. Keenan, just one thing on that sucker room roof. There's an older house that's been there for quite a while, and back earlier in the fall, that roof was open on that. And I would say it's like a good two-story house, and it was a hydraulic affair so that the roof went up. So my question is this, when that roof is open, is that visible to the folks from the Campbell Avenue, I mean? In other words, if the house is built and that sucker room roof is open, is that visible to the people on the street and across?
Oh, you mean the
street?
roof itself?
Yes, when it's open.
It's a good question that, I'm not sure, I'm not the architect. Let me find out for you. He's sitting in the crowd.
Any other questions from the board while we wait for that?
I have a follow-up to that, Karen.
Okay.
Yeah, the roof opens up to the back, so you don't see it along the frontage of the house.
All right, so then it wouldn't be above the 35-foot maximum height?
No, that actually is, that side of the house, I believe, is one story. That portion is lower, so that would open up to the rear of the lot.
All right,
Okay?
thank you.
You're welcome.
You know what, just one quick thing, this has been kind of like on my mind about this. Have you guys planned for water issues after you build this house? I mean, have you done any study? The gentleman that were here last month says there's already water issues in that area when it rains. Now, I wouldn't want to see the water from this guy's property push to the guy's property next door and flood him out.
Are you talking about drainage issues?
Yeah.
Okay, well, by law, we cannot increase drainage coming off of the property. Matter of fact, if there's an existing natural problem coming with the natural contours of the property, we're probably gonna solve it. Typically, we can't increase drainage. We can't, impervious material on the site cannot increase drainage coming off the property.
But at the same time,
By
there's
law.
no drainage on the street. There's no pipes, there's no drains, there's no
absorb the-
nothing on that street.
Our only obligation is to make sure that by putting the improvements on the property, we are not creating additional runoff coming off the property than would exist with the natural contours.
But once the house is there, then it's too late.
Well, the building inspector has jurisdiction over this too.
I know, but once the house is up, then it's too late. It's,
Wait, what, I didn't understand. It's not going to increase runoff coming off the property. It's not too late, we can't do that. Are you saying if we build a house and that happens,
it
then we
already,
violated the law? We can't do that.
it already exists.
No, that's based on natural runoff coming off the lot. That's for
Now you
if a
put a
neighbor.
4,200 square foot house, blacktop driveways or whatever, I foresee more water coming down.
No,
there.
our obligation is we can't design it that way. We must design adequate drainage mitigation to make sure that no more water comes off the lot after construction than currently exists.
Because I think that's the flow of the land. The flow of the land flows down into that one corner.
But we can't increase what's already there. It's mitigated through the site plan design.
John, explain how you do that.
Yeah, I don't know how they do
I was
that
just going to
either.
ask that.
Well,
John will do it.
Basically, how it's done is there's various methods. So for a single-family house, you're going to have probably a few dry wells, a couple grass swales. The dry wells will take the volume out. That's the increase in volume from basically the roof of the house. And you're going to have some grass swales, most likely going through the lot, controlling runoff to going to the point where it's discharging now. And through the combination of those two uses, we don't discharge any more that we currently are, and we don't impact any neighboring properties. We control it on our property. That's any type of development. You can't push more water onto someone else's property. It has to be controlled, as Jay was saying, through the law.
Well, if there's drains in the streets, it's one thing. When there's no drains in the street, that's
Well,
another thing.
it's going somewhere now. And I think what the gentleman was saying before is, he's at the bottom of the hill, and his lot is wet. And if anything, we'll probably reduce the water going there by taking out that area of the house that we're gonna treat and quantify.
You guarantee it.
I don't guarantee anything. That's just natural. I mean, this is every application that comes, any type of development has to attenuate for that stormwater, and it's all the same. It's all
I
the
know,
same.
but this is the first time an applicant's been in front of me in like 15 years on a private road, so it's not like this happens every day.
Not the
It's not the
variance
nature-
application, but the
It's not the
development.
nature of the road that controls the drainage, it's the nature of
Correct.
the topography, and that's got to be mitigated by our construction on the lot. It's not the nature of the road, whether it's a public road or a private road.
You know, I'd feel more comfortable if the planning board was spearheading this. To be honest with you, I mean,
Well, your building inspector has been doing this for a long time, and he's
there's
certainly
nothing against
capable to
him.
do that, so.
And he
There's
will
nothing
most-
against
your-
the building
your building
inspector.
inspector will refer this to the village. That's just what's gonna happen.
Village engineer
he's
will.
gonna refer it to the who?
The village engineer will get involved. They will. That's how site plan lots go, in my experience here in the village.
Anything else, Kevin? No. Joe? Anything else, Gary?
As a follow-up question to what Kevin just asked, how do you determine on any property what the current as-is discharge is?
Without getting into all the technical details, we do a hydraulic study. So we take the property as is, so it's basically a wooded lot. There's a whole slew of calculations that are put together and basically determine at a point, at the discharge point, what our volume of water is. That's they call it pre-development.
It's a paper exercise, though, nobody goes out when it's raining.
No, it's all hydraulic modeling.
It almost looks like wetlands.
That it's not.
Any other questions from the board? All right, yeah. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to open this up to the public. If you have something to say, please wait until you're called, and you go to the podium, give your name, your address, and then what you need to say. Anyone in the first row?
Steve Lopez, 28 Campbell Avenue. The issue, when you do this water testing when they come out and they want to monitor, if there is a change in the flow after, because this house is gonna be big, I understand. And
How
I,
big is your house right now?
my house is only like, what, 1,400 feet? It's not that big, you know? And I have a shared well. It's 4 houses on 1 well, okay? And now, this house is gonna be a huge house, and I believe 3 kitchens, am I correct in that?
Not
what's
exactly,
something
no,
like that?
no.
What was it?
There's one kitchen, a
One kitchen?
Passover kitchen, and a butler's pantry.
At Butler's Pantry. Okay, so now when do this monitoring, and there is an issue where our pressure dropped, and everybody's pressure dropped, what happens next?
Every
Well-
homeowner has the right to take from the ground as much water as they need for their domestic purposes. And New York law, unlike other states, is very firm on that, even if it damages his neighbor.
Even if it damages his
Yeah.
neighbors?
The only exception is when somebody proposes a large subdivision of many lots. And that's different because it's not one person taking what they need for their own domestic needs.
Even if it damages his neighbors? I wanted to, that's interesting. Thank you very much.
Law
Even if
isn't
it
always wise.
Damages his neighbors. Oh, I'll be ready.
Didn't you mention you had a
The
road maintenance agreement?
Oh, yes, we do have a road maintenance agreement. I can submit it to you guys. I have it right here.
I mean, I would really like to see it.
Yeah, you
Sure,
can submit
that's,
it
yeah, well, here you go.
into the record.
Can we get copies of that?
Yeah. You want
And
you want
the perk
copies?
tests,
Is that a copy we can keep?
that, you have another copy?
Anybody have a copy that we can keep?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And the perk tests, they're gonna be done by an independent company, or is the town gonna be there when all these things happen, when they do a drainage test and all these things for the house that's coming onto the property?
I believe the perk test will be witnessed by the village engineer, John? The village engineer will witness the perk test.
Okay. My questions are fine.
Very surprising.
Very neighborly.
Is there anyone else in the first row?
Matt Higgins, Highland Mills. I see there's a lot of questions about the street. It's a paper street. I've never heard of that. You say it's a filed street. Where is the filed map showing the street? And how do you know this property is where they say it is in relation to the street? Has anybody seen this street map, and where is it published? You know, I think you should find out about,
You can get that online.
it's not for me, I'm saying for your own
We
benefit.
have it.
You have it?
Of course.
Okay, very good. Well, so in relation to this street, the property is, it's an actual street, you're saying? This is,
Yeah, there's blacktop.
it's Blacktop Street, okay. Well, 4,000 feet doesn't sound like it fits in with the other houses on this street. And drainage is obviously doesn't fit if the road has no culverts. So that's something to keep in mind for the flooding in this neighborhood. And I've seen in my area where I live how you could put as much dirt down as you want and the water could still come up. And presently being pumped out of a place that's all filled in, it sometimes just doesn't go where it's supposed to, so, you know, you should keep that in mind. If it doesn't, does this have road frontage then? Is this what I'm hearing? There's road frontage?
Yes, it's on a private road.
Okay.
Doesn't have town road frontage.
So the
It's got private road
difference, the difference is,
They need a variance.
okay. Well, you should use the most restrictive, restrictive use should be applied on this case, if it doesn't fit in with the existing setting at any rate. Thank you.
Anyone else in the first row? Second row? Third row? Back row? Wow. That was easy. All right, we've got, do we consider this tonight since it was,
Yeah, if this is
Just
a
give-
copy for us to
it's-
keep, I think we should enter it, yes.
is that a copy for us to keep, or do we need to make? Has, okay. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go, you need to come to the podium, please. Thank you.
Then we have a road,
Please give your name.
State your name first.
Joe Delarocca, Campbell Avenue.
There you go.
I know we have a road agreement, but we have a large house being built. I'm assuming it's going to be built. Now, heavy equipment going to come in, and they're going to tear up this road. Now, being that they're the first house in the block, and everybody else in the block needs to get by, are we now going to be financially responsible to fix the road for this new house when damage occurs from heavy equipment?
I believe if it was approved, we could require
Well, it
that
would-
if there was any damage, that it be,
We can include such a
Mitigated.
condition, but that's a statement of what the law would be in any event.
Okay.
How big is your house?
My house is about 1,405 square feet, give or take.
Is that really the standard on that block?
About, yeah. Maybe one house, I think it's, Bob's has 2,000 square feet, it's probably the largest house in the block.
Mr. Delarocca, may I ask a question about the agreement? It's pretty much that you all collectively pay for the maintenance to the road if there is any damage, you know, from salting and so forth.
Well, we don't
and-
really salt
And the
it.
plowing of it during the winter, you all chip in
For plowing,
collectively
yes.
to plow it.
Yes,
And everybody is a member of that agreement that lives there, in the 7 houses that are there now, all
I
of those
believe
7
so,
folks pay in.
I believe so, yes.
All right, thank you.
any last minute people that need to say something about this application? The applicant need to say something?
Just a couple things. John's going to talk about the lot sizes on the road. Speaking to the people who are going to buy the lot, or, we haven't seen the road maintenance agreement, but they're perfectly willing to consider, entering into it and becoming a party to
How do you
it.
know that?
Because I just spoke to
curious.
him.
You just spoke to him while we were here?
Yeah. Sitting right there.
Oh, there they
Yeah,
are.
but how did you know that was the guy buying the house? When I asked you before, you didn't know
I
who was
don't,
buying
because
the
I
house.
said I do, I know them.
Okay, but you didn't know the entity that was buying the house?
I don't know the entity that's buying, I don't know if they're buying their I didn't participate, I'm not the
I
lawyer in
get- no,
that
no, no, I know.
transaction.
I know.
I am not the
I know.
lawyer in that transaction. I don't stick my nose where it doesn't belong. I was hired to do this. I ask questions when I have to ask them, but I have no clue who signed that contract. The gentlemen are here who are either the principals or are the parties. I'm not trying to hide anything here. You asked me a question, I don't know. But I will tell you that, after reviewing the agreement, most likely, I'm assuming it's an equitable agreement, they were willing to they don't have an objection to participating in a road maintenance agreement. John has some comments he wanted to make about the size of the lots on the road.
I just wanted to touch upon the size of lots. It seems to be coming up quite often. Most, if not all, the lots that are on that road are all half-acre lots. And the house sizes range from 2,495 square feet down to 1,200 square feet. They're all on half-acre lots. Our lot is an acre. It's a full acre. Even with our large-size house, as everyone is claiming, it's a 2,700 square foot footprint, but that includes a 2-car garage. So the living area is only 2,200 square feet on the first floor. There's an additional 1,500 on the second floor. So your total is around 3,700 square feet. It's a little larger than the rest of the lots on the road. It's newer construction. Some of those are older houses, they were built a little smaller. But our lot size is double all the other lots on that road that exist. So that's why it fits in with the character of our lot, and we meet all the setbacks because of that acre.
Is there a discrepancy on the drawings that we have? This says 2,700 feet on the first floor.
Yeah, I subtracted out the
50.
garage. from the 2,700.
Oh, so you remove, okay.
Yeah, because
All right.
it's an attached two-car garage. The footprint hasn't changed, it's still 2,700, but you take the garage out.
Okay, because the numbers here don't add up to the 3,700.
Because I took the
Right,
garage out,
okay,
yeah.
all right,
That's all.
all righty. Nothing else? Anybody, last minute, anything? Do you think we can close this public hearing? Or do you
I would like
need
to
to
make-
continue? Anybody?
Anybody?
Well, you can make the motion, see if it carries.
What's that?
Make the motion, see if it carries, and if not, then we'll just keep it open.
I would like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second?
All in favor? Joe?
Aye.
How do you vote? Gary?
Aye.
Kevin?
Aye.
Andrew? Aye, also. So the public hearing is now closed for the Kumar application, which means if you have any last-minute things to say, you can't say them.
You missed the boat.
We will deliberate, have our discussion at the end of this meeting. You're welcome to stay, or you could watch the tape, or you could read about it, or whatever, all righty? On the agenda, we have, let me just get my paperwork here. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Yeah, you stole mine.
No.
Yeah, this is mine. We have a second public hearing that the applicant has requested be moved to January 10th. Is there anyone here who wished to speak to that application? I would encourage you to come back in January. However, if you really need to say something, we could. Say that again, I'm sorry. All right, so, no one's here? All right, so that Kupacek Markowitz application will be, have a public hearing January 10th at our next meeting. All right. Building inspector's report, we received
Wait a minute, we
nothing.
got to make a motion to continue the
Oh,
public hearing.
right, sorry. Thank you, Kevin. Do I have a motion to continue the public
Make a
hearing?
motion.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so that public hearing will be continued in January. We have no building inspector's report. We're going to deliberate on the Kumar application. You're welcome to stay. Okay.
Perhaps I could outline some of the issues that relate to the Kumar application for you. Section 7-736 of the Village Law of the State of New York is a parallel section to Section 280A of the Town Law, and people often have some familiarity with 280A and 280A variances, but we're in a village now, so it's a little bit different. And the earlier decisions Mr. Myro has brought to your attention were decisions under 280A. What 280A is about, and 7-736 of the Village Law is about, is not really a village street versus a private street. It's a mechanism to make sure that there's adequate fire, police, and emergency vehicle access to lots before a building permit is issued. Maybe if we as a group were going to write such a law, we would have done a better job, because 7-736 is a difficult section of law. What it requires is this: before a building permit can be issued, two things about the roadway have to be met. First, it has to have a certain formal status. And that's achieved in one of several ways. The most common way would be if it was a state, county, town road, or village street. That would automatically satisfy the status. Another way would be if the village had an official map where it laid out all of its streets, even streets that aren't built that they wanted to see happen in the future. Those would satisfy that status requirement. I'm told that the village does not have such a official map of its streets. Therefore, another way of meeting that requirement is if the roadway providing access is one shown on a filed map. As Mr. Myro has told you, there was a filed map here, and that's borne out by the tax map that you see that shows that street as a line, often called a paper street. That's not the end of the story, however. After it meets formal status, it has to meet a second requirement, and that is suitable improvement. And that can be met in one of several ways. One way would be if the roadway was built to the village road specification, or if the village had one, a private road specification that was part of the code book and was well established. If that is not the case, then it comes to the zoning board. And the zoning board has one decision to make. If it meets the formal status requirement, it has to determine whether there's a suitable improvement of that roadway surface. If it's not built, or if the surface is not suitable, you can dictate what a suitable improvement would be. The law says that a width of 15 feet is presumed to be adequate and suitable. In this case, as Mr. Myro told you, this roadway has been the subject of multiple requests for variances from the requirements of 288, now Village Law 7736. In some of those applications, the roadway was not improved at all, and the relief was rejected because there was not suitable improvement. Over the years, we came to the point where, in one of the applications, the village got Dennis Lindsay, I should say the town, got Dennis Lindsay, the town engineer, involved, and set forth a specification that he believed would be suitable for purposes of emergency vehicle access. And a variance was granted under 288 for that purpose to that lot. The question here is, you're now a village, and you have this application before you. If that roadway is suitable for the purpose of emergency vehicle access, and the fire department and the police have reported to you that in their view it is, then this applicant is entitled to have you review and consider granting a variance. Issues like drainage and the size of the lot, while real and issues that the building department has to take up, are not really part of that equation, because all that you're concentrating on here is formal status having been met, is the road suitably improved such that the building department can begin to review the application for the building permit. It's your decision to make. I assume that most of you are familiar with the roadway or have seen it. You certainly could conduct a site visit if that was necessary. I would recommend that if you do consider granting this variance, that you attach several conditions to it. Firstly, there's my notes here, where'd they go? I would recommend that since the applicant has represented that it intends to consolidate the 4 lots, and this is a single building parcel, that the documentation that accomplishes that consolidation be delivered to you before any building permit is issued, to make sure that is accomplished. Secondly, I think the applicant should be required to enter into and sign on to this private roadway easement and maintenance agreement. I make the further recommendation that this does not appear to be a recorded document, but merely one signed by the homeowners. And I would recommend that it be re-signed by all of the parties in recordable form and recorded with the Orange County Clerk. If parties refuse, we cannot force them to sign, but the applicant has to make an effort to redraw this as in recordable form and to present it to all of the existing homeowners. Failing their willingness to sign a recordable document, they must agree to sign on to this document and abide by its terms. And lastly, as was mentioned earlier,
Mike, that was a maintenance document you?
it's both an easement and a maintenance agreement. The way it just says road maintenance agreement, but it does recite the right of ingress and egress for the benefit of the lot owners. But the important part is the maintenance obligation that they would sign on to. And lastly, and I suspect your code requires it, although I have not had a chance to look at the code, the applicant should be required, if there is roadway damage done during the course of construction of the home, that they bear the cost of returning it to the condition it was in before construction began. But it's for you to decide whether or not the variance should be granted. The law says that a variance under this section is an area variance. How you square the one focus of the statute on adequacy of emergency vehicle departments with the traditional 5-factor analysis of an area variance is difficult to square, but I think you need to do so. And that is, you should look at, for the purpose of what's being granted here, the right to a building permit, whether that changes the character of the neighborhood. It's not the house that's going to be built, it's whether or not allowing the building department to review this would change the character of the neighborhood, whether there's a need for this variance. I tell you that it looks like they couldn't get a building permit without the variance, therefore there appears to be a need. Substantial nature, again, it's one of the factors, but I don't know how you get it to apply to a 280A variance, which is either a thumbs up or a thumbs down based upon the emergency service access issue. Whether there are any adverse physical and environmental impacts, and again, that flows from the issuance or the right to issuance of a building permit and not to what is being constructed. And lastly, whether it is a self-created difficulty, and certainly it is because the applicant purchased this home charged with the knowledge that this was a roadway that does not meet village specs and that a 7-736 variance would be required from the village board. But I think you should discuss those issues, deliberate, and unless you need further information, vote on the application.
Mr. Donnelly, a question, please, on
Yes.
the damage to the road.
Yes.
Since we're not exactly certain who's going to end up building this, how do we, get a person to agree to pay for any damage that's done since
Well,
so
I think-
far Kumar owns it, but somebody else is going to end up with it
Sure,
and so
but
forth?
the variance flows with the land, not with the person that received the variance. So the requirement binds whoever, purchase it or builds upon it. And the building department will see the decision, and they will enforce that as part of the building permit process. But the variance travels with the land. Whoever does it is bound by the condition.
Thank you.
All right, let's go to the questions.
All right, you want to go through the questions one by one, and we'll discuss them if there's... All righty, first question, this is for an area variance. Will the granting of this variance produce an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood or create a detriment to nearby properties? The applicant says, no. The property will be a single-family residential dwelling in a residential zone. This action will also serve to combine the 4 lots into one, so it will be to the benefit of the neighborhood, only a single house versus 4 houses. What are your thoughts? Anybody?
It'll be the biggest house on the block.
Well-
Not even close. Not even close.
So what are you
Even with the
saying? Are you
removal of the
saying,
garage. Yeah,
are you saying that it would create a detriment to nearby
Yes.
properties?
I do.
I have a comment on that.
Yes.
And Mike, maybe Mike can speak to this. Mike, is it my understanding that it is the right of any property owner to build the largest building that he or she can build by law and
That
code?
complies with code.
And if you try to stop them, that's a taking.
Well, it may or may not be a taking. But I think equally as important is the undesirable change that this focuses on is not the house that's built.
Neighborhood.
Yeah, well, detriment to the neighborhood, the character of the neighborhood, but it's what results from granting the variance, not necessarily in this context from what will be built there, because the granting of the variance is simply a right to obtain a building permit. It is not a right to build any particular house. You couldn't dictate what house they can build. That's solely within the jurisdiction of the building department. That's why I say it's very difficult to square this statute, 7736 280A, with the 5-factor analysis, because all the statute says you're to look at is the roadway adequate for the access of fire, police, and emergency vehicles? How do you square that with the 5 factors? But I suggest to you, it is really that you look at what is the impact to the character of the neighborhood from allowing them to apply for a building permit, because that's what you're allowing them to do. What they build is an issue is between them, the code, and the building department.
Well, Karen, based on their, especially at the last meeting, there's a lot of issues up there on that road, especially with bad weather. And I'm not convinced that the issues are gonna be resolved.
So you're talking more to question 4, which is environmental?
Well,
You're talking about water
it's gonna-
runoff, is that what you're?
Well, this also reverts to the neighbor.
Kevin, if
All
there are
right.
drainage issues that impact on the ability of the roadway to carry emergency vehicles in and out in certain inclement weather periods, then it would be a legitimate exercise of your jurisdiction to look further into that, whether to have the village engineer look at
Well-
it or something else. But I think your emergency services people have told you they don't have that
I don't care
problem.
about the emergency services. I know they can get in. What about the homeowners that live there now?
Okay, but the only jurisdiction you have,
Then I feel it's affecting the neighborhood.
okay,
All right, that's where I'm leaving it.
right.
Anyone have any thoughts on that besides Kevin, as far as it affecting the neighborhood? So will the granting of this variance produce an undesirable change in the neighborhood? Kevin says yes.
I say yes.
Andrew says yes. What do you say, Joe?
It is a big house, but it is on a full acre.
You can't include the house.
I say no.
Gary, what do you think?
To me, it's clearly gray. And I'm straddling that line.
There's
I
no
mean,
gray in my
Excellent
little boxes.
arguments have been brought up both
Yeah.
ways. But based on Mike's guidance, I would say no.
I agree also, no, because what we're looking at is the road as far as the improvements that are made and the access, and whether the applicant has a right to apply for a building permit to build on this parcel of land. Any problems supposedly will be mitigated, and that's out of our jurisdiction anyway. So I guess the noes have it. So we agree with the applicant on that. Number two, question number two. Can the benefit you seek be achieved by some other feasible method other than variance? Applicant says no. The property is wholly contained on a private road, so we do not have the ability for frontage to a public road as requested, excuse me, by the zoning regulations. Without this variance, nothing can be done on this property. It's on a private road. I mean, there's really no discussion for this, as far as I can see. And anyone have a point other than that? Gary?
It's fair to bring up the question that some of the public brought up, that there's I'm not sure of the right terminology, there's an undeveloped road.
Right, but I think
would
they
need a
also
variance
said,
there, too.
And
right, it's still a private road, but I think you can't make, wasn't it the point made that you can't make an applicant develop something if there's something already developed?
They can choose
They-
their access, but
you
the
know,
same variance would
I
be
agree.
needed from Edison as from Campbell. You'd still need a variance.
okay.
That answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. So can the benefit be achieved by any other means? I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Not unless the town makes it a public road. All right, everyone agree that the answer would be no on that one? All right. Number three, how substantial is the variance that you are requesting? Applicant says minor. The lot, once combined, will meet all current zoning bulk regulations for the R2A district. The frontage is not a substantial variance.
It is a substantial variance.
Well, if you look at it as far as,
He
you
needs
know,
100 foot of
right,
road
right,
frontage. He's
it's,
got no road
right, so
frontage,
it's
so
if you're
therefore,
looking at it that way,
it's 100%.
I agree that it's a minor variance, only because they're on a private road, there's no other way to access that property other than through the private road, and you can't deny a homeowner or a property owner access to their property. I don't think you can, right?
Why can't you?
Well,
if this was a
if it's
non,
your, if it's not.
if this was a non-qualifying street, meaning it didn't meet the formal status requirement, you could deny them the right to a building, the opportunity to obtain a building permit. And if it was not improved to a specification adequate for emergency vehicle access, you could deny them the opportunity to apply for a building permit. It has more than 100 feet of frontage on Campbell. The question really is, and that's what Gary flagged for you, is that a qualifying street? And once you determine it is, and I believe the proof before you shows that it is, it's on a filed map, then the frontage, in terms of its dimensional quality, the 100 feet is met, because the formal status is met. And if what they were asking, let me give you an example where substantiality might come in here. Say the applicant was asking for, to build a road to 5 feet in width. This was back in the Cowpath day when nothing was there, and you felt that 20 feet was better. And you weren't, and you know, if you were discussing whether or not the 5-foot width was a substantial variance, you'd say, sure is. It's 1/4 what we want to see it be, and it's inadequate. That's a substantial request. Here, they're building it to the they're not building it, the roadway has been built to the specifications set by the town engineer. But I don't know how you, again, how you square substantial nature of a variance with an application that's either thumbs up or thumbs down. But the law says you have to.
So Kevin, you think it's substantial? Correct?
You're asking for 100%. Do what you want.
No, it's not me. it's
Let's
the
move
board.
along. This has
Joe,
been
what are your
dragging on
thoughts
for
on
too
this?
long.
It has no road frontage, I mean, on a
Yeah,
public road.
right, that's true.
All right?
In that
And
sense, it is
a major
100.
point.
Right,
I've
it's true.
spoken to this before.
Yes, we have.
However, there's other houses on the same street. It meets all the other setback and coverage considerations. And the emergency service people said they can get in and out just like they would for the other 7 houses. So I agree.
What do you think, Gary?
I agree with Joe. Even though Kevin's point was that it sounds substantial, and I understand what he's
Yeah,
saying.
right.
By law, the argument is that they would not be before the board, other than the fact that the law says they can't build on a private road. Everything else, they wouldn't be here. So I can't say under those circumstances that it's substantial. It's unsubstantial under those, based on that.
And I'll say it's substantial. I'll agree with Kevin, and we can move along with this.
I'm going with minor. Only
Oh.
because there are other houses, they need access. All right, number 4. Will the granting of the variance have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district? Applicant says no. Since we're combining 4 small lots into one, this action will actually be beneficial to the neighborhood, as described above. An adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions, and we're not allowed to consider the size of the house, correct? This has nothing to do.
application,
Right, so we can't say, well, a large house
You
would
know
be out
my
of place.
answer.
I do.
And you know my answer already also.
Okay,
so.
Joe, what do you think?
Well, this one I have a little problem on, and it kind of goes back to the water issues. Mr. Donnelly, you did state earlier that, basically, you can take the water out of the ground that you need,
For domestic
this-
purposes on a single-family home, yes.
and there's nothing that can be done to protect the wells that are there, or the 4 houses on one well?
Well, frankly, the village goes beyond that common law rule, and just to make sure we're not running into a problem, as John explained to you, does do well testing to make sure it is adequate so that the people who live there will have enough water. And next, requires, to the extent that neighbors cooperate, that monitoring be done to make sure there's not a drawdown problem as a result of running that well for a lengthy period. So the village will look deeper than what the law says. What I'm telling you is, New York has a very strange position, and it simply says that for your own domestic needs, you can remove all of the groundwater you need. And if that has an impact on your neighbor, that's just too bad, because he could do it to you too.
I
Doesn't sit
understand law
right.
is law, but
Doesn't
it
sit
just
right.
doesn't seem to make sense.
But
No,
we go
it doesn't.
further.
On
But
somebody
in any
else's
event,
well dry.
but the village goes further, and they require drawdown testing.
All right, worst case scenario, that it does draw down things and create a problem, what happens then? You know what I mean? You've kind of given a permit and so forth. I mean, it seems like, as I believe Kevin said earlier, it's once it gets started, you know, it has a life of its own and it continues.
Well, generally, what I see happening in the municipalities, when that begins to happen in areas with frequency, zoning is changed to make sure the lots are big enough that those things don't happen. Or water districts are created and water is brought from another location and a transportation system for that water is set up. Municipalities address that problem. You're asking me what rights does a property owner have on an existing lot? And literally, this could be done 4 times on the 4 well, the lots don't conform, they'd have to consolidate them, but they could do 2 lots because the 2 each would meet that. Each would be able to draw sufficient water for their domestic needs. Now, if they drew more than that, if they started running a bottling company, then the law would step in and say you can't do that. But residential homes are permitted to draw that. What would happen? there may be a neighbor has to drill a well deeper. I mean, certainly, I mean, I represent Monroe. The hydrogeologist for the town of Monroe is recommended that we impose a requirement that wells be drilled to adequate depths much deeper than what the well driller would typically tell you when he hits water, so that this wouldn't happen, because you do have that leapfrogging problem. Somebody comes in, they drill, a guy next door starts to go dry, et cetera. But it has to be solved either privately or by some municipal change to zoning or other code provisions.
Karen, are we gonna move along with this?
No, we're going to move along after we get the answers, Kevin. We can't just move along to move along.
You don't have to worry about it after tonight for me. Let's
All right,
go.
thank you,
So
Mr.
what-
Donnelly.
Joe, so it's a gray area. What do you think?
I disagree on this one.
Me and him
So-
already disagree.
Yeah, I know. Gary, what do you think?
There's a potential for adverse effect, even if,
Yeah.
as Mike says, it's okay that there's an adverse effect.
Yeah, I agree that there is that possibility, and what concerns me is, you know, you're talking about trucking in water or creating water districts, that, you know, that's not gonna happen when, you know, Mr. So-and-so says, hey, my well went dry, and they say, oh, yeah, we'll truck some water in for you, no, it's not gonna happen. You're gonna be stuck. So it may, in 20 years down the road, they may do this, but they're not gonna do it right away, so there is definitely the possibility, I don't know for sure, but it concerns me. The last question is the alleged difficulty self-created? The applicant says no.
The
Applicant
answer's
always,
going to be yes.
applicant always says no. Applicant is combining 4 existing tax parcels into one. This is self-created because you bought 4 pieces of land on a private road. I don't know what they plan to do with it, knowing, and if they didn't know, the law says they should have known. You had to do your due diligence when you purchase property. So this is a self-created difficulty. Okay, now we have to decide if we're going to give this variance. The first question, we said no. Agreed with the applicant. The second question, we said no. Agreed with the applicant. The third question, minor. It was split. Fourth one, we pretty much disagreed with the applicant. And the fifth one, we disagreed with the applicant. So we have to decide.
Yeah, it isn't a mathematical
I know,
scorecard
I
approach.
know,
It's a
right.
tool to help
It's-
you. The
right.
real issue is,
Yeah, and-
if, on balance, is it appropriate to grant the variance using those tests as a guide?
Mike, one last question. Can you speak to precedent? Karen, I know you told me in the past.
Sure.
That variances have been granted on this road previously.
Well, they were granted by the town zoning board, not by the village planning board, but I certainly think they're persuasive authority for why that board in the past found that this was an adequate roadway surface for emergency vehicles. Going in the future, having granted it here would be strong precedent if somebody else came along and asked for a building permit.
Also, when these houses were, the ones that were approved, you know, the town was a lot less populated. Probably wasn't as much, you know, I'm talking about the area. So if you're worried about water and you're worried about this, it wasn't as big a concern then as it is now.
Listen, I'm worried about the neighborhood, that's all I'm worried about. So I'm not in favor of a variance.
Probably the easiest way to take a vote is for someone to make a motion to grant the variance, and if there aren't 3 affirmative votes, then there's a denial.
Do I have a motion to grant the variance to build, to issue a building permit for the Kumar application on
And
a
I
private
suggest
road?
with the 3
And-
conditions I suggested.
Actually, 4, yeah.
Okay.
If we attached, well, we'll get to that if we have to. Do I have a motion?
Those conditions were the consolidation
The 4
document?
conditions were to document the consolidation of the lots, to sign on that right, that
Damage
That's-
to the road.
Repair or
damage to the road, and also possibly get this as a re-signed
I will include
Filed
that in the.
documents.
Yeah, I'll
Right.
include that in that language of that second condition.
Do we have a motion to grant this?
Oh, did you make the motion?
No, I'm asking if
she's
there's
asking
anyone
for a
to make a
motion to be
motion.
I will make that motion.
Is there anyone seconding that emotion? I'll second the emotion, the emotion. I'm singing
I've
songs.
heard that one.
I'll second the motion. All right, let's take a vote. Joe, should we grant this variance?
I vote aye.
Gary?
Aye.
Kevin?
No.
No.
Andrew? Thank you, guys. I vote aye. So the motion has carried, right, with those four conditions,
Yes.
with those four conditions.
With your permission, I'm going to keep this maintenance agreement. I'll provide you with copies.
Appreciate that, thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I'll make that motion.
Seconded?
I second.
All right, motion carried. Meeting is adjourned.
Karen, I'm probably quitting the board. Because I feel our lawyers got way too much to say.